The most important question right now that most of you are probably asking is, well, what kind of book should I write? Should I write a knowledge share book or should I write a memoir, right? That is the number one question we get. So what we're going to do right now is dive into that and help you answer that question. So there's two basic kinds of books. There are nonfiction, which is what we're about to teach, and there's fiction. We don't teach fiction. So if you want to write a novel, you're shit out of luck here. Then we're the wrong people. This is, my favorite book on fiction, how to write fiction. It's called The Fiction Formula by Sean Platt and Johnny Truant. Just the one I recommend. There's a ton of others. If you want to look at other ones, they're fine. But those are the two guys that I would pay attention to for fiction. Now, let's talk about nonfiction. There are two types of nonfiction. There is, let's call it conventional or regular nonfiction, which is sharing your knowledge. And then there's memoir, which is sharing your story. Okay, and we're going to teach both of those. Nonfiction's this week, memoirs next week. Okay, is that right? Yeah, we're doing memoir next week, right? So nonfiction, which is sharing your knowledge. This is any nonfiction book you write primarily to help someone solve a problem or create a transformation, right? So let's give some examples. Pretty much every business book is a conventional nonfiction book, right? Good to Great. You guys have all heard of that. Pretty much all personal development and self-help books, like Can't Hurt Me, huge book that we did at Scribe. That's a conventional nonfiction book. Or any how-to book. This is a book you probably haven't heard of. It's called The Third Option. It's by Shannon Miles, which is Brian Miles' wife. It's about how women can use VA and remote work to kind of have a family and a career and balance them well, right? How do you do it? That's how, okay? Now, memoir is where you tell your story, right? So a book of personal stories. Great example is Tiffany Haddish's book, The Last Black Unicorn, which we did as well. That's just a bunch of her stories, and some of them are funny, some are heartbreaking. It's across the kind of spectrum, right? An autobiography, which, Michelle Obama's book, which is the best-selling autobiography of all time. And then there's a family, which we did not do, unfortunately. I would have loved to work on that, but we didn't. And then there's a family legacy book, which is pretty much like an autobiography or personal stories, but it's more about telling your family who you are. That's our CEO, JT, who just changed his name. His name's Javon Thomas McCormick. He always went by JT because of the way the corporate world worked. And he's finally like, nah, the world's changing. I'm going to go by Javon, which was a big thing described. It's very cool. His book's just like that. It's really cool. All right, so let's talk about this. A nonfiction book's about delivering specific value, right? So help me solve my problem or get a transformation. Someone who's looking for a solution or a transformation, they're looking for nonfiction. A memoir tells your story to move or entertain or help the reader, right? Where, like, if I'm a reader, I'm saying, I want to learn about my life from your story. Now, here's the big question we get. What if I want to help people, but I want to help them through my story, right? Okay, you can do that. But here's the thing. You got to decide. Your book can be primarily about sharing knowledge or primarily about telling your story, but it can't primarily be about both, right? At the same time. So this is true even if the content is the same. You're probably confused right now. This is confusing. So let me give you some examples, okay? These two books, you might have heard of these. They're both by the same guy, Michael Singer. On one side is The Untethered Soul. That's book, millions of copies in print, huge bestseller. The other one is The Surrender Experiment, which didn't sell as much, but sold pretty well. So The Untethered Soul is basically an instruction manual on how to become enlightened, right? How to meditate and how to kind of deal with your emotions and stuff like that. It's pretty good. A lot of people love it. Honestly, I didn't really like it that much. It just didn't resonate with me. But it's in the self-help section. Like if you want to learn how to have an untethered, how to take that journey beyond yourself, like it says, that's the book, right? Okay, Surrender Experiment tells the story of how Michael Singer himself became enlightened. He tells his story, right? It's in the memoir section. So they're covering very, very, very similar ground. But one is his story, one is instructional how-to, right? And it's basically the same story and the same info. They're just totally different angles. Now, listen, it's not like everything in Surrender Experiment is in Untethered Soul or vice versa. That's not true. Just like if you look at a house from the front and back, it's the same house, but you're seeing a lot of different things. Same thing, okay? But so to give a better example, a more example, nonfiction tends to be, hold on a minute. I gotta change this real quick. This thing's in my way. Nonfiction tends to be directive, right? Here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to know and do to get the results you want. That's untethered soul. So let me give you an example. Here's how the writing goes. The highest spiritual path is life itself. If you know how to live daily life, it becomes a liberating experience. But first, you have to approach life properly, or it can be very confusing. To begin with, you have to realize that you really only have one choice in life, and it's not about your career. You see, like I can keep reading, you get it. That he's telling you what to do and how to think if you want a certain goal. That's conventional nonfiction. Now, memoir tends to be introspective. Here's what I did, what I felt about it, and what happened as a result. So let me give you an example. Sitting alone in a 6-seater jet at 40,000 feet is a very peaceful place. I fell into meditation and my mind became very still. When I opened my eyes, I absorbed the tremendous difference in my environment from when I had first decided to let go and see where life would take me. I still lived in the same woods and kept my same practices morning and evening, but somehow everything else changed. You see how different this is? The angle and the perspective is totally, totally different, even though he's covering a lot of the same stuff. Now, it's important to note that in Untethered Soul, Michael Singer does tell a few parts of his story. But in nonfiction books can and should have your story in them, but the only parts of your story should be told in service to sharing your knowledge. And that's it, right? So you make a point, here's my point, I'm gonna tell you a quick story that exemplifies the point, and that's it. Make sense? Okay, another example, in Can't Hurt Me, David makes a point, even though it is the book is 90% his stories, right? It's here's what happened and here's how I thought about it and what I did. So you might be reading it and think, this is like memoir. No. Because David makes a point to give the reader lessons based off his life story, right? It is very much an instructional guide. How does the toughest man alive steel his mind to hard tasks? That's what the book Can't Hurt Me, that's the question that book answers. Whereas Tiffany Haddish's book, she just tells her stories and lets the reader decide what to think about those. She doesn't tell you what to think. She doesn't go on and on about how a young Black girl can find her way out of poverty the way Tiffany did. Now, don't get me wrong, go read the reviews on Tiffany's book, especially on Audible, and you're going to see thousands of reviews where young Black girls are saying, this woman's a model for me. It's incredibly inspiring, but she doesn't tell people what to do. David tells people what to do, right? Very similar life stories, actually. But David's in the personal development self-help section. Tiffany's is in memoir autobiography. So yes, of course, there's some overlap between the two, but they have fundamentally different jobs. The job of nonfiction, you're teaching someone how to solve a problem or create a transformation, right? And people go to seek out nonfiction to learn something specific. The job of memoir is to tell your story as honestly as you can so the reader can learn about their life, right? That's a really important thing. I want you to pay attention to this. No one's going to read your memoir to learn about you. People read memoir to learn about themselves. Does that make sense? I sold millions of memoirs, and virtually no one read those because they were super interested about the details of my life. They read those because they wanted to laugh and they wanted to be entertained and they wanted to learn something about themselves. They wanted that reflected back on them. So there's no right or wrong answer here about which book to write. The answer depends on what you want your book to accomplish for you. Now, generally speaking, if your primary goal is, let's say, business related, then, and I mean that in the broadest sense, then usually a nonfiction book is best, right? And if your primary goal is, let's say, personal growth or legacy related, then generally memoir is best, right? It all comes down to this. Do you want to share your knowledge or do you want to share your story? And I mean, you're going to do a little bit of both in each, but what's the primary purpose? If it is to share knowledge, nonfiction, share story, memoir. And you can write both. Michael Singer did. You can absolutely write both. Most people, I believe, have multiple books in them. But you do not want to combine them. That creates a meatball sundae. Anyone know what a meatball sundae is? Seth Godin wrote a great book about this. Meatballs are delicious. Ice cream is delicious. When you put them together, they're disgusting. When you try and combine a memoir with a knowledge share nonfiction book, you get a confusing morass. But if you are telling your story or telling people how to do something, it's all clear and good. So if you're still uncertain, it's cool. Keep your mind open for now. Watch the next 2 trainings, positioning and objectives, and that should be able to get it